The February rain hammered Oakland with the kind of relentless persistence that turned streets into rivers and made the world feel smaller, colder, meaner. Sophie Brennan sat cross-legged on the thin mattress that served as her bed in the cramped bedroom on 98th Avenue, her small fingers trembling as they held the wrinkled piece of paper she'd discovered 30 minutes earlier. The paper had been hidden inside her father's old work boots, the steel-toed ones he'd worn every day to the auto shop where he'd worked for 12 years before the forklift accident in August had ended everything. 6 months. That's how long Daniel Brennan had been dead. 6 months since the police officer with the apologetic eyes had knocked on their door and spoken the words like workplace accident and died on scene that had shattered Sophie's 8-year-old world into fragments she still couldn't reassemble. The boots had been stuffed in the back of the hallway closet, and her mother Anna had wanted to throw them away last week, had stood there with a garbage bag in her hand and tears streaming down her face. But Sophie had begged to keep them. They still smelled like her dad motor oil and the cinnamon gum he'd always chewed, that sharp, sweet scent that meant safety and Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. She'd been searching through his things that afternoon while Anna and Travis were out shopping. Travis. Even thinking his name made Sophie's stomach clench with the particular nausea that came from fear mixed with helpless anger. He'd moved in 3 months after Daniel died, bringing with him a permanent scowl carved deep into his face and hands that moved too quickly when he was angry, which was most of the time lately. Anna had changed since Daniel's death, had become someone Sophie barely recognized. The woman who'd once read her stories about brave princesses and clever foxes now spent most evenings staring into wine glasses that multiplied as the night wore on, her eyes going glassy and distant, like she was watching a movie only she could see. Sophie squinted at the faded handwriting on the note. The paper had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn thin, threatening to tear. But the words were still legible, written in her father's distinctive blocky print. He'd left her notes before tucked into her lunchbox with drawings of smiley faces slipped under her pillow after she'd had nightmares taped to the bathroom mirror before big tests at school. This one was different. This one felt like a message across the border between living and dead, a final gift he'd somehow known she'd need. The words read, "If anything ever happens to me and you need help, real help, go to this address. Ask for Ronan. Tell him Daniel's daughter needs protection. They'll understand. They'll keep you safe. I promise, baby girl. These men are family." Below the message was an address on Foothill Boulevard, written carefully with numbers she could read despite her sometimes backward sevens. And at the bottom, 3 words that made her heart race with equal parts terror and desperate hope: Hell's Angels, Oakland. Sophie had heard whispers about the Hell's Angels. Kids at school talked about them in hushed voices on the playground, exchanging stories like trading cards, tales of dangerous men with motorcycles and leather jackets covered in patches that meant things only they understood. Rough men, scary men, men who did things the law couldn't touch. But her father's words contradicted everything she'd been taught to fear. He'd called them family. He'd trusted them to protect her if she needed protection. And Daniel Brennan hadn't been the kind of man who trusted easily or lied to make things sound better than they were. A door slammed downstairs with force that rattled the cheap windows in their frames. Sophie's pulse spiked instantly, her body going rigid with the learned response of prey animals. She recognized the heavy, uneven footsteps, the slurred cursing that drifted up through the thin walls like poisonous smoke. Travis was home early, and from the sound of it, he'd already been drinking. His voice carried up the stairs, sharp-edged and threatening, in ways that made Sophie's skin crawl. "Where's that little brat, Anna? Where the hell is she?" Sophie quickly folded the note with shaking fingers and shoved it deep into the pocket of her worn jeans. Her reflection caught in the small mirror hanging crooked on her wall. A thin girl with dark tangled hair that hadn't been properly brushed in days, and a purple bruise blooming beneath her left eye like a poisonous flower. That one was from yesterday when she'd accidentally knocked over the juice glass at a breakfast. Travis had backhanded her so hard she'd seen stars dancing in her vision and tasted copper blood in her mouth. Anna's voice came next, shrill with the particular anxiety of someone trying to prevent an explosion they knew was coming anyway. "Sophie, get down here. Now." Sophie descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, buying time she knew wouldn't help. The living room reeked of stale beer and cigarette smoke, a smell that had permeated every surface since Travis moved in. He stood near the kitchen doorway, his bulk blocking most of the weak afternoon light that filtered through dirty windows. He was a large man over 6 feet tall, with a beer gut that strained against his stained t-shirt and arms thick from years of warehouse work. His eyes were bloodshot webs of red, and a mean smile played at the corners of his mouth in a way that meant someone was about to get hurt. "Your teacher called today." His words came out slightly slurred, consonants softening at the edges. "Said you fell asleep in class again, making us look bad, making me look like I can't control one skinny little kid." Sophie kept her eyes fixed on the stained carpet beneath her feet. Meeting his gaze directly only made things worse. She'd learned that lesson with bruises that had taken weeks to fade. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just tired from—" "Didn't mean to," Travis mocked, his voice rising to a cruel falsetto. "You never mean to do anything, do you, just like your worthless father? Couldn't even operate a forklift without killing himself. What kind of man dies from incompetence?" Something hardened in Sophie's chest, sharp and hot, and bigger than the fear. Her father hadn't been worthless. He'd been kind and patient and had never once raised his hand to her. He'd taught her how to ride a bike without training wheels, had stayed up late, helping her build a volcano for the science fair, had made the best chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning. He'd been good, and Travis spitting his name out like a curse was a violation Sophie couldn't let stand. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but defiant. "Don't talk about my dad like that." The slap happened so fast, Sophie didn't see it coming, didn't have time to flinch or duck or protect herself. Travis's open hand connected with the side of her face with enough force to send her sprawling sideways. Her hip collided with the sharp corner of the coffee table, and pain exploded through her side, white-hot and breath-stealing. She hit the floor hard, the impact jarring her teeth together, fresh copper, flooding her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. From far away, as if through water, she heard her mother's voice. "Travis, that's too much. You can't just—" The protest was weak, performative, the sound of someone going through motions they knew were pointless. Anna didn't move from her spot on the sagging couch, didn't come to help Sophie up, didn't put her own body between her daughter and danger. She just sat there, clutching her wine glass like a lifeline and looking away. "Kid needs to learn respect," Travis muttered, already losing interest. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and disappeared into the garage, the door slamming behind him with finality. Sophie lay on the floor for a long moment, tasting blood and feeling pain radiate from her hip in waves that made her vision swim. But through the physical hurt, a single thought crystallized with perfect, diamond-hard clarity. She couldn't stay here anymore. Not another day, not another hour. Travis was getting worse, his violence escalating in frequency and intensity, and eventually he'd hit her hard enough to do permanent damage. Eventually he'd kill her, and her mother would sit on that couch and watch it happen and do nothing to stop it. The note in her pocket felt heavy with possibility and promise. Her father had left her a way out. Somehow he'd known, maybe he'd sensed it coming, maybe he'd just understood how grief could twist people into shapes they'd never intended, that she might need protection after he was gone. He'd given her an address, a name, a lifeline. All she had to do was be brave enough to reach for it. That night, after Travis passed out on the couch in front of the television, and Anna retreated to her bedroom with another bottle, Sophie pulled out the battered atlas she'd found at a garage sale months ago. It cost her 50 cents from the change she'd collected returning bottles and cans. She traced the route from her house to Foothill Boulevard, with her finger memorizing street names and landmarks. 98th Avenue to 87th, then west on MacArthur Boulevard to Foothill. 2 miles. It might as well have been 1,000, but it was walkable. She could do it. Over the next 3 days, Sophie planned with the kind of methodical focus that would have impressed her teachers if they'd noticed it. She studied the route every night after everyone else went to bed. She packed a small backpack with careful thought, a water bottle filled from the tap, the photograph of her and Daniel at the Oakland Zoo where they'd spent her 7th birthday, and the note folded inside a plastic bag to protect it from rain. She waited for the right moment, knowing it would come, knowing Travis's schedule was predictable in its chaos. The moment arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. Travis left for his shift at the warehouse on Hagenberger Road at 2:30, wouldn't be back until after midnight. Anna had taken pills, the ones prescribed for her nerves that made her sleep for hours, and was already unconscious in her darkened bedroom. The house was empty except for Sophie and the ghosts of what it used to be. Sophie changed into her warmest jacket, a navy blue windbreaker that had belonged to Daniel before Anna had altered it to fit Sophie's small frame. The sleeves still smelled faintly of him if she pressed her face into the fabric. She pulled on her sneakers, the ones with the hole developing in the left toe that Anna kept promising to replace but never did. She shouldered her backpack and stood in the doorway of the house that had stopped feeling like home the moment Daniel died. Looking back, she saw nothing worth staying for. The cracked walls and stained carpet, the empty wine bottles accumulating like archaeological evidence of her mother's retreat from reality, the heavy silence broken only by Travis's rages. Whatever waited for her at that address on Foothill Boulevard couldn't possibly be worse than this. The worst that could happen was that the bikers would turn her away and she'd be exactly where she was now. But there was a chance, small and fragile but real, that her father had been right, that these dangerous men might actually be her salvation. The Oakland afternoon was cold and damp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened more rain at any moment. Sophie walked with her head down and her hood up, trying to look purposeful, like she had somewhere to be and people expecting her. She passed familiar landmarks that marked the geography of her limited world. The corner store where she sometimes bought candy with quarters she found in couch cushions, the park where she'd played before everything changed, and childhood ended, the bus stop where she waited on school mornings watching other kids get driven by parents who smiled and looked at their children with actual affection. As she walked, her hip ached with each step, the bruise from Travis's shove throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her face hurt where he'd slapped her, and her tongue was swollen where she'd bitten it. But the physical pain was almost welcome. It kept her focused, reminded her why she was doing this, fueled the desperate courage that propelled her forward when her legs wanted to stop. Cars passed by, their occupants cocooned in their own worlds, too absorbed in phones and music and conversations to notice a small girl walking alone. That was Oakland. Everyone had their own problems, their own survival to worry about. A kid on the street was just part of the landscape, invisible unless she actively caused trouble. The neighborhood began to change as she crossed into East Oakland. The houses grew sparse, replaced by auto shops with barred windows and warehouse buildings tagged with the graffiti that marked gang territories in a language Sophie couldn't read. The sidewalk cracked and buckled beneath her feet, weeds pushing through concrete with the stubborn persistence of life that refused to be contained. This was the Oakland most people warned their children about, the part where bad things happen and good people didn't go. But Sophie felt no fear. Fear had become such a constant companion over the past 3 months that it had lost its sharp edges, become just another sensation like hunger, or cold, or the ache in her hip. Besides, she reasoned with child logic that had seen too much. The monsters everyone warned about were strangers in dark alleys. Her monster wore a familiar face and lived in her house and hurt her where no one could see. The danger she was walking toward couldn't be worse than the danger she was walking away from. She counted streets as she walked, checking each sign against her mental map. 92nd, 89th, 87th. Each one a small victory, each one bringing her closer to the address her father had written. Her stomach growled, reminding her she'd skipped lunch, too nervous to eat. Her legs burned with exertion and her feet were developing blisters in her worn shoes, but she kept moving forward with the kind of determination that came from having no other options. When she finally turned onto Foothill Boulevard, her heart began hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. The address corresponded to a large warehouse-style building set back from the street, industrial and imposing. Motorcycles lined the parking area in neat rows, dozens of them, all gleaming chrome and black leather and mechanical precision. A sign above the entrance displayed the infamous Death Head logo she'd seen in news reports, the skull with wings that marked Hell's Angels territory. Sophie stood at the edge of the property, suddenly aware of how small she was, how impossible this entire plan seemed now that she was actually here. These were the Hell's Angels, men who made grown adults cross the street to avoid them. Men who lived by rules she didn't understand. What if they laughed at her? What if they were angry she'd come? What if her father had been wrong about them? Or what if they didn't remember him? Or what if the debt he thought they owed him wasn't actually real? The clubhouse door opened, and a figure emerged that made Sophie's breath catch in her throat. The man was massive, easily 6'4", built like the kind of mountain that didn't move for anything. He had a gray beard that reached mid-chest and arms covered in tattoos that disappeared beneath his leather vest. The patches on his vest were clear, even from distance. President on the front Hells Angels Oakland, arching across his broad back. But it was his eyes that held Sophie frozen, startling blue, against his weathered face locked onto her with an intensity that saw everything. Marcus Ronan Cross had been sitting inside reviewing supply orders when Diane had pointed out the window at the small figure standing at the property edge. "There's a kid out there," she'd said, with the particular tone that suggested this was not a normal occurrence. "Little girl, look scared but determined. You should probably—" But Ronan was already moving instinct overriding conscious thought. A child standing alone at a biker clubhouse in East Oakland meant something was seriously wrong. He descended the steps with deliberate slowness, making himself visible, giving the kid time to run if that's what she needed to do. As he got closer, details resolved thin to the point of malnourishment clothes that didn't fit right, and a black eye that made his blood run cold with recognition and rage. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, bringing his massive frame closer to her eye level. The gesture was automatic, learned from years of dealing with his own daughter when she'd been small and the world had seemed too big. Making himself smaller, less threatening, creating space for her to speak without feeling overwhelmed. "Hey there, kid. You lost—" The girl's hands shook as she pulled something from her pocket, a piece of paper folded and refolded so many times it was nearly falling apart. She held it toward him without speaking, her eyes huge and glistening with tears she was fighting desperately to control. Ronan took the paper, gently careful with the fragile offering, and unfolded it with fingers scarred by decades of motorcycle work. The handwriting hit him first, blocky and familiar. Daniel's handwriting. Daniel Brennan, who'd died 6 months ago in that forklift accident, who'd helped the club rebuild engines and never asked for payment, who'd saved Beckett's life by pulling him from a burning car and shrugging it off like it was nothing special. The words arranged themselves into meaning: protection, Ronan's name, Daniel's daughter, family. Ronan's eyes snapped back to the girl's face and saw Daniel in the shape of her nose, the line of her jaw. But more than that, he saw something that made his chest constrict with painful recognition. He saw his own daughter Lily, dead 6 years now, who'd had bruises just like these, who'd needed protection. Ronan had failed to provide in time, who died because he trusted legal systems that moved too slowly and believed the wrong people. Daniel. He breathed, his voice rough with sudden emotion. His gaze traveled over her face, cataloging injuries with the eye of someone who'd seen violence and understood its language. "You're Daniel's little girl." Sophie nodded, and that simple motion was all it took. The tears she'd been holding back for 3 months finally broke free, spilling down her cheeks in hot tracks that she couldn't control, even though crying made her feel weak and stupid. She stood there on the cracked pavement of an Oakland parking lot, sobbing in front of a stranger who wore the colors of a notorious motorcycle club, and for the first time since her father died, she didn't feel completely alone. Ronan felt the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders. Responsibility, purpose. The ghost of failure transformed into opportunity for redemption. This child had trusted him enough to walk through Oakland and alone had carried her father's note, like a talisman, had believed in a promise made by a dead man that Ronan would protect her. He couldn't fail again. Wouldn't fail again. Whatever it took, whoever he had to go through, this girl was walking out of here safe. He rose to his full height and turned toward the clubhouse, his voice carrying the weight of command that came from decades of leadership. "Church now, everyone inside. We've got a situation." Within moments, men began emerging from the building. Big men with hard faces and harder lives etched into their expressions. They gathered around, curious glances landing on Sophie, taking in her small frame and obvious injuries with expressions that shifted from confusion to recognition to cold fury. Ronan looked down at her, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie." Her voice cracked but held. "Sophie," he repeated, committing it to memory, the way he'd once memorized Lily's schedule and favorite foods and the names of her stuffed animals. "I knew your daddy. He was one of us, not a patched member, but family all the same. He helped us out of some tight spots more than once, and we don't forget our debts." He paused, jaw tightening, rage building behind careful control. "Who did that to your face?" The question hung in the cold afternoon air. Sophie looked up into the circle of intimidating men surrounding her, men who society had taught her to fear, men who looked like they'd lived hard lives and survived through violence. And she saw something she hadn't seen in 3 months, people who were genuinely angry on her behalf, people who looked ready to fight for her rather than against her. My stepdad, Travis Holbrook. The names felt like confession and accusation both. And my mom, she doesn't stop him anymore. She just watches. A murmur rippled through the assembled bikers' expressions, hardening into something dangerous. Ronan's hand settled on Sophie's shoulder with surprising gentleness, his touch careful despite his size. You did the right thing coming here. Your daddy was smart to give you that note. I'm going to tell you something now, and I need you to believe it with everything you have. Nobody's going to hurt you again. You understand me? Nobody. Sophie looked into his eyes and saw absolute truth written there, saw the kind of certainty that couldn't be faked. For the first time in months, she felt a tiny spark of something she'd thought was lost forever. Not safety yet, but the possibility of safety. Not rescue yet, but the promise of it. The clubhouse interior surprised Sophie. She'd expected darkness and danger, something from movies about criminals and violence. Instead, she found a space that felt oddly welcoming despite its rough edges. The main room was large and open, with worn leather couches arranged around a massive wooden table, scarred by years of use and marked with the kinds of stories that left permanent impressions. Vintage motorcycle posters covered the walls, alongside photographs of rallies and runs, frozen moments of brotherhood and freedom. A bar stretched along one side, its surface bearing the marks of countless drinks and conversations. And despite the beer signs and bottle, the atmosphere felt more like a well-worn living room than the den of criminals she'd imagined. Ronan guided her to one of the couches with a gentle hand on her shoulder, then disappeared into a back room. Sophie sat stiffly, her backpack still clutched to her chest like armor watching as bikers filed in and settled around the space. They didn't crowd her, seeming to sense instinctively that she needed distance to feel safe, but their presence filled the room with energy that was both intimidating and strangely comforting. An older woman emerged from what Sophie assumed was a kitchen area, carrying a plate with a sandwich and some chips. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat braid, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and despite the leather vest she wore with its own patches, she reminded Sophie of the school librarian she'd loved back in second grade. "Hi, honey, I'm Diane." She set the plate on the table beside Sophie with practiced care. "You must be hungry after that walk. It's just turkey and cheese, but it's fresh. There's lemonade too if you want some." Sophie's stomach growled loudly, betraying her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's school lunch, too anxious about her plan to keep food down. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for the sandwich with trembling fingers. Diane sat down in a nearby chair, not too close, but not distant either, giving Sophie space to breathe. "I knew your daddy. Daniel fixed my truck once when I broke down on the freeway. Wouldn't take a penny for it, even though it took him 3 hours in the heat. Said helping people was payment enough. That's just what you did for family." That sounded exactly like Daniel Brennan. Sophie took a bite of the sandwich, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. Simple food prepared with care and offered without conditions or expectations. As she ate more, people approached in a steady stream, not all at once, but one or two at a time, giving her space to adjust. Each introduced themselves, and each shared a memory of her father painting a picture of Daniel that Sophie recognized but hadn't fully understood. A man named Vincent Miles Torres sat on the arm of a distant couch, glasses, mechanical gear, tattoos running down both arms, and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Your old man knew his way around an engine like nobody's business. Helped me rebuild a '67 Mustang from basically a pile of parts. Talked about you the whole time we worked. Showed us pictures. I feel like I already know you, kid." Another biker, younger and leaner, with a red beard and energy that suggested he struggled to sit still, perched on the edge of a chair. "I'm Lucas. Everyone calls me Beckett. Your dad pulled me out of a burning car 3 years ago. Saved my life without thinking twice about his own safety. Never asked for anything in return, never even brought it up again. Just said, that's what you do when someone needs help." The stories kept coming, each one revealing another facet of Daniel Brennan. Stories about mechanical genius and quiet generosity, about showing up when people needed help, and never keeping score, about earning respect and loyalty from men who didn't give either easily. Each story made Sophie's chest ache with missing him, but also filled her with pride. Her father had been important to people beyond just her. He'd built a community, created debts that were really bonds, made himself family to people who valued family above everything. Ronan returned with a first aid kit and crouched beside Sophie with practiced ease, his movements careful despite his size. I'm going to clean up that cut on your lip, okay? It might sting a little, but we need to make sure it doesn't get infected. Sophie nodded, setting down the sandwich. Ronan's large calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness as he dabbed antiseptic on her split lip and examined the bruise beneath her eye with professional thoroughness. His touch was nothing like Travis's, controlled, rather than violent, caring, rather than cruel. How long's this been going on? The question was quiet, giving Sophie space to answer or not. Travis moved in 3 months after Dad died. It started small at first, just yelling a lot, pushing me sometimes when he got frustrated. But it got worse after Christmas. He drinks every day now, and when he drinks, he gets mean. And Mom, her voice cracked, shame and anger and grief all tangled together. Mom just lets it happen. She's like a different person. Ronan's jaw clenched, muscle jumping beneath his beard, but his touch remained gentle as he applied antiseptic to the scrape on her elbow. This Travis, where's he work? Warehouse on Hegenberger Road. He leaves around 3 in the afternoon, comes back around midnight on weekdays. A man standing near the bar spoke up, tall and lean, with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow that gave him a permanently skeptical expression. I know that warehouse. Used to work security there before I patched in. Management's sketchy as hell, lots of under-the-table stuff. If Travis Holbrook works there, he probably fits right in. Ronan finished bandaging Sophie's elbow, then sat back on his heels, studying her with intensity that should have been frightening but somehow wasn't. His blue eyes held hers with absolute focus, making her feel Ain in a way she hadn't experienced since her father died. Here's what's going to happen. Sophie, you're staying here tonight. We've got a spare room in the back that's clean and safe. Nobody gets in without us knowing, and nobody gets past us. Tomorrow we're going to figure out the long-term plan and make sure you end up somewhere you can actually be a kid again. But first we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. He looked around at the assembled bikers, his voice carrying authority that made everyone fall silent. I need information on Travis Holbrook. Current address, work history, criminal record if he's got one. I want to know everything about this piece of garbage by morning, where he eats, where he drinks, who he knows, what makes him tick. We're going to document everything and build a case that's airtight. His gaze shifted to Diane. Can you get some proper clothes for Sophie? And we'll need to set up the back bedroom, make sure it's comfortable. Already thinking about it, Diane stood, her voice warm. I've got a granddaughter about her age. I'll bring some things by tonight. Clothes that actually fit, toiletries, maybe some books if you're a reader, honey. Sophie nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden mobilization on her behalf. Ronan turned back to her, his expression serious. I need to ask you some hard questions, Sophie. Private things that might be uncomfortable. But I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? Yes. Does Travis hurt your mother too? Sophie thought about this carefully, wanting to be accurate. Not really. He yells at her a lot and she cries sometimes, but he doesn't hit her the way he hits me. He says she's weak and pathetic, but mostly he just ignores her when he's not yelling. Has he ever touched you in ways that made you uncomfortable? In ways that weren't just hitting? Ronan's voice was gentle but firm, making space for the difficult question. Sophie understood what he was asking. They'd had assemblies at school about good touch and bad touch, about trusting your instincts and telling adults if something felt wrong. She shook her head quickly, relief in the gesture. No, nothing like that. He just gets angry and takes it out on me. He says I remind him of my dad, and it makes him mad that I exist. Relief flickered across Ronan's weathered face, tension releasing slightly. Okay, that's good to know. One last question, is there anyone else we should know about? Other family friends of your mom's, anyone who comes around the house regularly? No, it's just the 3 of us. My grandma lives in Sacramento, but she and Mom don't talk anymore. They had a big fight at Thanksgiving about Travis. Grandma said he was bad news and Mom got mad and told her to leave. I haven't seen her since. Ronan nodded slowly, processing information with the methodical focus of someone accustomed to making decisions that mattered. All right, here's what you need to understand, Sophie. Your grandma in Sacramento, that might be important. If she was smart enough to see through Travis, she might be willing to help. We'll look into that tomorrow. He stood and addressed the room again, his voice carrying command weight. All right, brothers and sisters, here's the situation. Daniel Brennan saved half our asses at one point or another. He was a good man who died too young, and he trusted us to protect his daughter if she ever needed it. Well, she needs it now. She walked 2 miles through Oakland alone to find us because she had nowhere else to turn. Question is, how do we handle this right? A heated discussion erupted immediately. Sophie listened as various bikers offered suggestions, each more intense than the last. Some wanted to pay Travis a visit tonight, make him understand the consequences of hitting children. Others advocated for involving the lawyer, a woman named Sarah Chen, who apparently specialized in family law. A few suggested contacting Child Protective Services, though their tones suggested deep skepticism about government effectiveness. The debate continued, voices rising, perspectives clashing, until an older man in the corner spoke up. Sophie hadn't noticed him before. He was smaller than most of the other bikers, with white hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen decades of life and understood its complications. Something about his stillness commanded attention. Name's Raymond Walsh. Everyone calls me Dante. His voice carried quiet authority earned through experience. Been riding with this club for 35 years, and I'm going to tell you all what I learned a long time ago through painful experience. When you act out of rage, you make mistakes, and mistakes put this girl at risk. The room quieted, everyone turning to listen. Dante continued with measured precision. We've got to be smart about this. If we roll up on Travis Holbrook tonight, what happens? Maybe we scare him. Maybe we do worse. Then what? Sophie becomes a ward of the state, bounces around foster homes where anything could happen to her, and we lose track of her. That what Daniel would want for his daughter. So what are you suggesting? Ronan's tone suggested he already knew, but wanted it said aloud for everyone. We document everything. We get Sophie to a doctor tomorrow, get her injuries photographed and recorded by a medical professional. We gather evidence systematically. We build a case that's ironclad and legal. Then we present that case to the authorities with documentation they can't dismiss or ignore. A younger biker with a mohawk and restless energy challenged immediately. And if the authorities don't act fast enough, if Travis gets to her again before the system moves its ass, Dante smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression, then we make sure he doesn't get the chance. We watch that house like hawks. We shadow that son of a bitch everywhere he goes. He so much as looks at Sophie wrong, so much as thinks about touching her again, then we have our conversation with him. But we do it smart, we do it clean, we do it in ways that protect this girl long-term instead of satisfying our short-term desire to beat the hell out of an abuser. Ronan looked around the room, gauging reactions in the expressions and body language of men he'd known for decades. He saw grudging agreement, anger being channeled into purpose. Dante's right. We do this mostly by the book. We protect Sophie through legal channels and documentation. But make no mistake, Sophie's under our protection now. That makes her family, and we take care of family. Always. A chorus of agreement filled the room, voices overlapping in affirmation. Sophie felt overwhelmed by the show of solidarity from these rough-looking men who'd been strangers 30 minutes ago. They were planning and strategizing on her behalf, treating her safety as their primary mission, mobilizing resources she didn't even understand. It was more protection than she'd experienced in months, more care than her own mother had shown. Diane touched her arm gently. Come on, honey, let's get you settled in the back room. You need some rest after the day you've had. The room Diane led her to was small but clean, tucked away in the back of the clubhouse, where the noise from the main area faded to a distant murmur. A single bed dominated the space, covered with a thick quilt that looked handmade. Fresh clothes were already laid out on the mattress, pajamas that looked brand new, and a set of jeans and a sweatshirt for tomorrow, all approximately her size. Bathroom's right next door, Diane explained, pointing to a door in the hallway. Fresh towels are in there if you want a shower. There's a lock on this bedroom door, and only Ronan and I have keys. You're completely safe here, Sophie. I promise you that. Sophie nodded, sudden exhaustion crashing over her like a physical weight. The adrenaline that had carried her through the 2-mile walk and the intensity of the past hour was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. Anything." "Why are you all doing this? You don't really know me. You could have just sent me away." Diane sat on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful and kind. "Your daddy helped a lot of people in this community, Sophie, but more than that, we believe in taking care of our own. And you're one of ours now. You became family the moment you walked through that gate with Daniel's note. This club, it might not look like much from the outside. Society sees us as thugs and criminals, as dangerous people to avoid. But the truth is we're a family. A family that chooses each other every day, that looks out for the vulnerable, that stands up when standing up is hard." She brushed a strand of tangled hair from Sophie's face with maternal gentleness. "You walked 2 miles to find us, sweetheart. That took incredible courage. You trusted us when you had no reason to, except your father's word. That kind of faith means something. It means everything, and we're going to honor it." After Diane left, closing the door softly behind her, Sophie lay in the comfortable bed and listened to the muffled voices from the main room. She thought about her father, about the note he'd left, about his certainty that these dangerous-looking men would protect her when she needed protection most. He'd been right. These intimidating bikers with their tattoos and leather and loud motorcycles had shown her more kindness in 2 hours than she'd experienced in 3 months. They'd believed her immediately without hesitation, without requiring proof beyond the evidence written on her face. Outside, the Oakland night settled over the clubhouse with its typical urban symphony, distant sirens, the rumble of traffic on the freeway, the occasional shout from the street. Inside, dozens of conversations were happening as the Hells Angels mobilized to protect one 8-year-old girl. Plans were being made, resources allocated, a message being sent that Sophie didn't fully understand yet, but would learn in time. That message was simple: an absolute mess with one of ours, and you mess with all of us. And Travis Holbrook, drunk in his rented house on 98th Avenue, had just made a very serious mistake. He'd put his hands on the daughter of a man who'd earned the loyalty of people who never forgot debts and never abandoned family. Sophie pulled the quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes, feeling safe for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring doctors and lawyers and complicated adult things she didn't fully understand. But tonight she could sleep without fear of footsteps in the hallway, without the need to stay alert for sounds that meant danger was coming. Tonight she was protected. And in the main room, Ronan Cross stood looking at the photograph of Daniel Brennan that Miles had pulled up on his laptop, a good man smiling at the camera with grease on his hands and light in his eyes. Ronan thought about Lily, about his failure to protect his own daughter, about guilt that had lived in his chest for 6 years, like a stone he couldn't cough up. This was his chance at redemption. This was how he'd honor Lily's memory, by protecting the daughter Daniel couldn't protect anymore, by moving fast instead of trusting systems that failed children, by doing whatever it took to make sure Sophie Brennan had the childhood she deserved. He looked around at his brothers and sisters, at the family he'd built through choice and loyalty, and saw the same determination reflected back. They were in this together. They were going to save this girl, and God help anyone who tried to stop them. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of bacon frying somewhere beyond her door. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, her mind still caught in the half-dream where her father was alive and Travis had never existed. Then memory rushed back with perfect clarity: the walk through Oakland, the note, the clubhouse, Ronan's promise that nobody would hurt her again. She was safe, actually genuinely safe for the first time in months. She dressed in the clothes Diane had left, jeans that fit perfectly without being too tight or too loose, in a soft gray sweatshirt with a small embroidered flower on the chest. In the bathroom, she examined her reflection, cataloging damage with the clinical detachment she'd learned over the past 3 months. The bruise beneath her eye had darkened overnight to a deep purple black that would take weeks to fade completely. Her lip was still swollen, despite Ronan's careful cleaning, and there were finger-marked bruises on her upper arms where Travis had grabbed her 2 days ago that she hadn't even mentioned yet. Evidence. That's what Dante had called it last night. Her body was a crime scene, and every mark told a story that needed documentation. When she emerged into the main room, she found it transformed by morning light flooding through high windows. The space that had felt warm and protective last night now looked surprisingly professional. A handful of bikers sat around the large table, working on laptops and reviewing paperwork spread across the scarred wood surface. Maps of Oakland covered one wall with various addresses marked in red ink, creating a geography of investigation. Diane called from the kitchen area with maternal warmth. "Morning, sweetheart. Come get some breakfast. Fresh pancakes and bacon." Sophie approached tentatively. At the table, Ronan sat with Miles and Dante, reviewing documents that looked official and serious. He looked up as she approached, his weathered face breaking into a slight smile that softened his intimidating appearance. "Sleep okay?" "Yes, thank you." "Good. We've got a busy day ahead of us." He gestured to the chair beside him. "First thing, Diane's taking you to see a doctor friend of ours who works at Highland Hospital. She's going to document your injuries properly, take photographs, create medical records. Then we've got an appointment with Sarah, our lawyer. She needs to hear your story directly so she can figure out the best legal approach." Sophie's stomach nodded with anxiety, but she nodded. She'd come this far. She could keep going. As she ate breakfast, the best pancakes she'd had since her father died, the bikers continued their work with focused intensity. Miles looked up from his laptop, his mechanical gear tattoos seeming to move in the shifting light. "Got Travis Holbrook's employment records. He's been written up 3 times in the past 2 months at the Hagenberger warehouse. Twice for fighting with coworkers, once for drinking on the job. Warehouse manager noted in his file that he's increasingly volatile and unpredictable. They're one incident away from firing him." Ronan leaned forward. "Criminal record." Miles scrolled through information on his screen. "Assault charge from 2019, pled down to disorderly conduct. Got a suspended sentence and was ordered to complete anger management classes, which he never finished. And here's something interesting. His ex-wife filed a restraining order against him in 2020. It expired last year, but the documentation's still in the system." Dante set down his coffee mug with deliberate care. "Does the ex-wife still live locally?" "Modesto, about an hour and a half away. I've got a phone number and current address." "Call her." Dante's voice carried the weight of experience. "See what she knows about his patterns, his triggers, what sets him off. We need every advantage we can get, every piece of information that helps us understand what we're dealing with." Sophie listened to this systematic information gathering with a mixture of fascination and growing hope. These men worked with the kind of precision she associated with television detective shows, building a case piece by piece, treating her protection like a military operation. The doctor's appointment was thorough and more painful emotionally than physically. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked at Highland Hospital in a small office that felt more welcoming than clinical. She was a petite woman with gentle hands and sad eyes that suggested she'd seen too many cases like Sophie's, too many children bearing marks of adult violence. She photographed every bruise with a professional camera, each click of the shutter documenting evidence. She measured the dimensions of the black eye, noted the healing, split lip, examined the finger mark bruises on Sophie's upper arms with careful attention. She documented partially healed injuries alongside fresh ones, creating a timeline of abuse that made Sophie's stomach turn when she saw the photographs displayed on the computer screen. "Has anyone from your school noticed these injuries?" Rodriguez's voice was clinical but kind, asking questions that needed answers. "I wear long sleeves," Sophie explained, her voice small, "and I'm good at making excuses. I told my teacher I fell off my bike when she asked about the black eye. Another time I said I tripped on the stairs and that's why I was limping. People believe you if you sound confident." Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful look with Diane, who'd stayed for the examination. "Sophie, I'm filing a mandatory report with Child Protective Services. Do you understand what that means?" Sophie nodded, remembering discussions from school assemblies about reporting requirements. "They'll investigate. They'll come to the house and interview everyone." "Yes, they'll likely interview you, your mother, and Travis. They'll inspect your home environment and environment based on what I'm seeing here." She gestured to the photographs on her screen. "And based on your testimony, I believe they'll remove you from that environment. But I want you to understand something important. The system doesn't move as fast as we'd like it to. It could take time for the wheels to turn. That's why she's staying with us." Diane's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "We'll keep her safe while the bureaucracy does its thing." The lawyer's office was in downtown Oakland, in a modern building that seemed incongruous with the gritty neighborhood surrounding it. Sarah Chen was a striking woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing and an air of competence that filled the room. She listened to Sophie's story without interruption, taking careful notes in neat handwriting, her expression revealing nothing until Sophie finished. When the story was complete, Sarah set down her pen and leaned back in her leather chair, studying Sophie with professional assessment. First, Sophie, I want you to know that what's happening to you is absolutely not your fault. You didn't cause this, you couldn't have prevented it, and you couldn't have stopped it alone. You did exactly the right thing by seeking help. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes at the validation, the simple acknowledgement that she wasn't responsible for Travis's violence. Sarah continued with methodical precision. Here's where we stand legally. Dr. Rodriguez's report will trigger a CPS investigation probably within 24 to 48 hours. They'll interview everyone involved. The photographs and medical documentation are damning evidence that's hard to dismiss. In a normal situation, I'd expect immediate removal from the home, either placing you with appropriate family or an emergency foster care. Why doesn't that sound particularly reassuring? Diane asked, picking up on the implied caveat. Because CPS is catastrophically overwhelmed and chronically underfunded. The caseworkers are good people drowning in impossible caseloads. They might remove Sophie immediately, or they might require Travis to leave the home temporarily, or they might implement what they call a safety plan and schedule follow-up visits in a week. We can't predict which route they'll take because it depends on factors beyond our control. She looked directly at Sophie, her expression serious. I need you to be brave for a little longer. CPS will interview you probably at school where they think you'll feel safer. They'll ask detailed questions about the abuse when it started, how often it happens, what exactly Travis does, whether your mother intervenes. It won't be easy to talk about, but it's absolutely necessary. Can you handle that? Sophie thought about the walk she'd taken yesterday, about finding the courage to approach a clubhouse full of strangers who could have turned her away. Yes, I can do it. Good girl, Sarah made a note. Now, Ronan mentioned that your grandmother in Sacramento is estranged from your mother. Do you know why they stopped talking? Grandma didn't like Travis. She met him at Thanksgiving and said he was bad news that Mom was making a mistake. Mom got really mad and said Grandma was being judgmental and didn't understand how hard things had been since Dad died. They had a huge fight and Grandma left. Mom hasn't returned her calls since. Sarah made another note, her pen moving quickly. We should contact your grandmother immediately. If she's willing, she could petition for emergency custody. That would be infinitely better than foster care. You'd be with family who already loves you. Would you want to live with her? Sophie barely knew her grandmother, had only met her a handful of times at holidays and special occasions. But Margaret Patterson had tried to warn her mother about Travis had seen through him when Anna was blind. I think so. She was always nice to me when I saw her. She makes really good cookies. I'll reach out to her today. Sarah's expression grew more serious, her lawyer mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. One more thing, and this is important. Ronan and the club want to help, and I deeply appreciate their protection of you, but I need them to understand the legal boundaries here. If they take matters into their own hands, if they confront Travis directly, if they threaten him, if they do anything that could be construed as vigilante justice, it could jeopardize the entire case and potentially expose them to criminal charges. Can you help me make them understand that? Sophie smiled slightly, remembering Dante's measured words last night. I think they already know. Dante explained it pretty clearly. They're not stupid. Sarah raised an eyebrow, a respect flickering across her features. Dante's still riding with them. Good. He's always been the voice of reason in that organization. That makes me feel better about the whole situation. Over the next 3 days, Sophie lived in a strange limbo at the clubhouse that felt both surreal and comforting. During daylight hours, when most of the bikers were at their regular jobs, mechanics, construction workers, one was apparently a high school shop teacher. The place was relatively quiet. Diane homeschooled Sophie, working through assignments that Sophie's teacher had emailed after Sarah contacted the school with a carefully worded explanation about a family emergency requiring temporary relocation. The lessons were oddly comforting, a return to routine and normalcy. Diane was patient and encouraging, praising Sophie's work in ways her own mother hadn't done in months. They worked on math problems at the big table, read passages from history books, practiced cursive writing that Sophie struggled with. In the evenings, the clubhouse transformed into something resembling a military command center. Bikers filled the space with focused energy, but it wasn't the rowdy, dangerous atmosphere Sophie had expected. Instead, it felt purposeful, organized, almost professional. Maps covered the walls showing Sophie's old neighborhood. Schedules were coordinated on whiteboards. A rotating watch was established on Anna's house, with different bikers assigned to different time slots documenting every movement, every visitor, every moment. Travis appeared intoxicated or aggressive. Miles set up a sophisticated digital surveillance system that shocked Sophie with its complexity. He positioned discrete cameras across the street from her former home, hidden in tree branches and behind parked cars, capturing footage that was both disturbing and validating. Sophie watched on a laptop screen safe in the clubhouse as Travis stumbled home drunk at 2 in the afternoon. She watched him kick their garbage can across the yard in a rage. She watched him scream at her mother on the front porch, Anna's body language showing defeated submission. "We're building a pattern of behavior," Sarah explained when she visited on the third day, reviewing the footage with professional assessment. "Every incident, every display of violence or instability strengthens our position. When we present this to a judge, they won't be able to dismiss it as isolated incidents or accidents. This is systematic documentation of ongoing danger." Sophie also watched as CPS visited her mother's house that third afternoon. A tired-looking woman in her early 40s climbed out of a beat-up Honda Civic carrying a clipboard and an expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. She spent 30 minutes inside the house, emerging with Travis following her to her car. He was clearly agitated, his body language aggressive, gesturing wildly as he spoke. The conversation ended with Travis throwing his hands up in frustration and storming back inside us, slamming the door hard enough that Sophie could see the frame shake even through the grainy surveillance footage. "That went well?" Dante said dryly, watching from over Sophie's shoulder. Sarah's phone rang. She answered, listened for several minutes with her expression growing progressively darker, then stepped into Ronan's office for privacy. When she emerged 20 minutes later, she looked both triumphant and concerned in equal measure. "Sophie, your grandmother wants to speak with you." She held out her phone. "She's prepared to drive down tomorrow and file for emergency custody. She had absolutely no idea about the abuse. Your mother hasn't returned any of her calls in months. She's—" Sarah's voice softened with genuine emotion. "She's very upset and very determined to get you somewhere safe." Relief flooded through Sophie like warm water. "Really, she wants me to live with her?" "Really, she's also furious with your mother for putting you in this situation. She made it very clear that she tried to warn Anna about Travis and was ignored. But right now, she just wants to make sure you're okay." The video call with her grandmother was both wonderful and painful. Margaret Patterson appeared on the screen looking older than Sophie remembered, her gray hair thinner and her face more lined. But her eyes, the same brown as Sophie's, filled with tears the moment she saw the bruises still visible on her granddaughter's face. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to reach you, should have insisted on seeing you even when your mother said no. I should have done something." "It's not your fault, Grandma." Sophie surprised herself with the conviction in her voice. "Mom didn't want help. But I do. I want to come stay with you." "Then that's exactly what is going to happen, baby girl. I promise you I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to get you out of there and somewhere safe, and then we're going to make sure that man never gets near you again." After the call ended, Sophie found Ronan on the clubhouse porch working on one of the motorcycles. The evening air was cool and damp, with typical Oakland weather, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. She stood beside him, watching his large hands move across the engine, with practiced expertise, adjusting something she couldn't identify. "Your grandma seems solid." He didn't look up, focusing on the mechanical work. "She is. Thank you for everything you're doing." Ronan set down his wrench and straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked out over the Oakland skyline, the familiar landscape of his city. "We're not done yet, kid. The hard part's still coming." "What do you mean?" "Your grandma's going to file for custody tomorrow. CPS is going to make their recommendations. Eventually, the judge is going to make a decision. All of that takes time, weeks, maybe months, depending on how backed up the courts are. During that time, Travis walks around free, probably angrier than ever, and looking for someone to blame. Your mother's going to have to face what she allowed to happen, And somewhere in all that complicated mess, there needs to be real consequences for what he did to you. Sarah said you can't confront him, that it would mess up the legal case. Ronan's smile was sharp-edged and dangerous. Sarah's a smart lawyer looking out for everyone's legal interests, and she's absolutely right. If we handle this wrong, it could blow back on you and on the club in ways that hurt rather than help. But there's a difference between confrontation and making a statement. There's a difference between revenge and sending a message that protects not just you, but every other kid who might cross Travis Holbrook's path. Sophie wasn't entirely sure she understood, but she trusted Ronan completely. What kind of statement? The kind that makes sure Travis and every other coward like him understands that there are people in this world who won't tolerate abuse. The kind that reminds them that victims have protectors who don't forget and don't forgive. The kind that, he paused, choosing his words with care, the kind that your father would approve of if he was still here. Inside the clubhouse, Sophie could hear voices rising in discussion, planning something she wasn't quite part of yet, but could feel building like pressure before a storm. She thought about her father's note, about his absolute certainty that these men would protect her when she needed protection. She thought about the last 3 days about being treated with dignity and care by people society dismissed as dangerous criminals. When? She asked quietly. Ronan's voice carried absolute conviction. Soon, very soon. Miles's discovery came late that third night, when most of the clubhouse had quieted and Sophie was supposedly asleep in her back room. But she wasn't sleeping. She was lying in bed listening to the muffled conversations, trying to piece together the adult world that was being reconstructed around her protection. She heard Miles's voice rise with excitement, heard chairs scraping as people moved quickly, heard Ronan's sharp command for everyone to look at something. Unable to resist, Sophie crept to her door and opened it just enough to see into the main room. Miles had his laptop connected to a large monitor displaying documents and photographs that glowed in the dim light. The bikers were gathered around him, their expressions shifting from interest to fury as they absorbed whatever information he had uncovered. Detective James Morrison, Oakland PD. Miles explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. 15 years on the force, promoted to detective 7 years ago. And here's the connection. His wife, Claire Morrison's maiden name was Holbrook. She's Travis Holbrook's younger sister. The room erupted in curses and exclamations. Dante raised his hand for silence. Are you absolutely certain about this? Birth certificates don't lie. Claire Holbrook married James Morrison in 2015. Travis was in the wedding photos. I found them on social media. And it gets worse. Miles clicked through to phone records displayed in columns of numbers. I did some digging that's definitely not legal, so none of this is admissible in court. But Morrison's been in regular contact with Travis since we brought Sophie here. Look at these calls. The day after she arrived, Morrison called Travis 3 times. Yesterday, he called twice. And there's text messages. He pulled up message logs that made Sophie's blood run cold, even from her hiding spot. Morrison to Travis. Those bikers are building a case against you. You need to disappear for a while, or better yet, push for custody of the kid before they can act. I can make CPS files disappear if you move fast enough. Travis to Morrison. Can you arrest them for kidnapping? The kid's mother didn't give permission for her to stay with them. Morrison to Travis. Working on it. Give me a day to set it up properly. Ronan's voice came out deadly quiet, more frightening than shouting. Morrison's actively obstructing justice to protect his brother-in-law. He's using his badge and police resources to help a child abuser avoid consequences. Just like cops protected my ex's boyfriend until Lily was already dead. Ronan added, old pain bleeding through his words. System fails kids because people like Morrison put family loyalty over protecting the vulnerable. It's the same pattern, the same corruption, just different names. Diane's voice cut through the anger. We knew the system was broken, that's why we're doing this. But now we know specifically who's obstructing and how. We can work around him if we're smart. Sophie retreated to her bed before anyone noticed her eavesdropping, but sleep was impossible now. The protective adults in her life were fighting not just Travis, but a corrupt cop with resources and authority. The odds seemed overwhelming. The call came the next morning. During breakfast, Catherine Mitchell from Child Protective Services needed to interview Sophie at school. Sarah accompanied her, providing legal representation, while Diane drove them in her sensible SUV that didn't draw attention the way motorcycles would. Catherine Mitchell looked exhausted in ways that went beyond simple tiredness. She was maybe 40, with graying hair, pulled back severely, and clothing that suggested she dressed in the dark. Her eyes held the particular weariness of someone who cared deeply about work that was slowly crushing her spirit. She pulled Sophie from class into the guidance counselor's office, a small room with inspirational posters and uncomfortable chairs. "Sophie, I'm Catherine from Child Protective Services. I received a report from Dr. Rodriguez about your injuries. I need to ask you some questions about your home life. Is that okay?" Yes. Catherine's interview was thorough and systematic, walking through questions designed to assess danger and establish facts. Who lived in the home? How long had Travis been there? Describe a typical day. When did the violence start? How often did it happen? What exactly did Travis do? Did Anna try to stop him? Were there weapons in the house? Had Travis ever threatened to kill anyone? Sophie answered honestly, fighting tears as she described the escalating pattern of abuse. She described her mother's withdrawal, the constant fear, the way she'd learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid triggering Travis's rage. By the end, Catherine's professional mask had cracked, revealing genuine distress. "Sophie, I believe you." Catherine's voice was firm despite her obvious emotional response. "But I need you to understand something about the system I work in. I have 80 cases right now. 80 children who need protection and intervention. The courts are backed up for months. The best case scenario is we move you to emergency foster placement within a week, maybe two." "A week?" Sophie's voice cracked with panic. "I can't go back there for a week. He'll hurt me worse because he'll know I told." "Where are you staying now?" Sophie hesitated, aware that her answer mattered. "With friends, safe friends who are protecting me." Catherine's eyes narrowed with understanding. "Friends or those Hells Angels bikers your attorney mentioned?" "Sophie, I appreciate that they're trying to help, but they're not appropriate guardians for a child. If you don't have immediate family willing and able to take custody, you need to go into emergency foster care until we can schedule a hearing. They've protected me more in 4 days than anyone else has in 3 months." Sophie shot back with surprising fierceness. "They're good people who actually care what happens to me." Catherine sighed, clearly conflicted between protocol and reality. "I don't doubt their intentions. I'm sure they mean well, but legally I can't approve that placement. It's not about them being bad people. It's about regulations and proper procedures." She began filling out paperwork, making notes that would trigger the next phase of bureaucratic process. Sophie watched her work, seeing exhaustion and frustration in every movement. This was someone who wanted to help, but was trapped in a system that moved too slowly and demanded too much. Back at the clubhouse, Sarah received a phone call that made her expression darken with barely controlled rage. She listened for several minutes, asked sharp questions, then ended the call and addressed the assembled bikers with barely suppressed fury. "Morrison's blocked the emergency custody petition. He's flagged Sophie's case in the system as being under investigation for potential kidnapping and custodial interference. His official report suggests the Hells Angels may have coerced Sophie into making false allegations against Travis. The family court judge won't schedule an emergency hearing until the police investigation is resolved." "How long will that take?" Ronan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Could be weeks. Morrison controls the timeline since it's his investigation. He's bought Travis significant breathing room." "That son of a bitch!" Beckett slammed his hand on the table. We should be smart," Dante interrupted firmly, "which means we don't give Morrison ammunition. We need to move faster than he can obstruct, but we need to do it legally." Miles had been typing frantically on his laptop throughout this exchange. Now he looked up with grim satisfaction. "I tracked down Teresa Holbrook, Travis's ex-wife. Want me to reach out?" "Do it," Ronan commanded. "If she'll testify about his pattern of violence, it strengthens everything. It shows this isn't a one-time situation or Sophie misunderstanding discipline. It's who Travis is." The conversation with Teresa Holbrook happened over speakerphone with Sarah present to explain the legal situation. Teresa's voice shook when she answered, fear evident in every syllable. "How did you get this number? Did Travis send you?" "No, ma'am. My name is Raymond Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of an 8-year-old girl who's being abused by Travis. We're trying to build a case to protect her, and we understand you had experience with his violence." Long silence. Then, is she okay, the little girl? She's safe right now. We're making sure of that. But we need help proving Travis is dangerous. Teresa's breath hitched audibly. I testified against him in 2018. Got a restraining order that's expired now. The judge gave him a plea deal because he supposedly had no prior record and showed remorse. The system failed me, and now it's failing another child. Over the next 30 minutes, Teresa described 3 years of escalating abuse verbal attacks that became pushing, that became hitting, that became violence, that nearly killed her. She had documentation, police reports from 4 separate incidents, hospital records showing a broken collarbone and fractured ribs, photographs of injuries she'd hidden from family and friends until she couldn't hide them anymore. Will you testify? Dante asked gently. Come to Oakland and tell a judge what Travis is capable of. If I testify, he'll find me. Teresa's terror was palpable through the phone. He always said if I ever spoke against him publicly, if I ever ruined his reputation, he'd make me disappear. I've moved 3 times in 2 years because I'm terrified he's looking for me. He won't find you, Miles promised with absolute certainty. We'll make sure of that. And after this case, Travis won't be in any position to threaten anyone ever again. Teresa was quiet for a long moment. Then, send me the details. I'll do it. I'll testify. Because I see myself in that 8-year-old, and I won't let another child suffer what I survived. Margaret Patterson arrived from Sacramento the next morning driving her sensible Honda Accord with determination written across her weathered face. She was 64 with gray hair and brown eyes exactly like Sophie's, and she moved with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested she'd made decisions and wouldn't be swayed. The reunion was emotional and complicated. Margaret wrapped Sophie in a fierce hug that smelled like lavender and bread, holding her granddaughter, as if she could protect her retroactively from everything that had already happened. You're coming home with me. You're going to be safe. I promise you that. Sarah filed the emergency custody petition that afternoon with Margaret present, but Morrison's interference had already poisoned the well. The family court clerk informed them that due to the ongoing police investigation, the earliest available hearing date was 2 weeks out rather than the immediate emergency session they'd requested. 2 weeks. Sophie couldn't stay at the clubhouse for 2 weeks. CPS had been officially notified of her location and would force foster placement if she remained. Margaret legally couldn't take her across state lines without a custody order. They were trapped in bureaucratic limbo while Travis walked free and Morrison used his badge to protect him. Ronan called an emergency meeting that evening with every patched member present. Sophie was sent to her room, but she could hear the intensity of the discussion. Through the walls, could feel the building pressure, like weather before a storm. When Ronan emerged an hour later, his expression carried the kind of dangerous determination that Sophie was learning meant decisions had been made that would change everything. We escalate, he announced to the room. We send a message so loud that Morrison can't suppress it, so public that the system has to respond immediately. We make Travis Holbrook too visible to protect. What kind of message? Beckett asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. The kind that involves every Hells Angels chapter in Northern California. The kind that gets media attention. The kind that makes the city of Oakland ask why bikers are more effective at protecting children than their own police department. Dante nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Full demonstration, maximum show of force, legal but absolutely unmistakable. How many can we mobilize? Ronan's question was directed at Miles, who was already pulling up contact lists on his laptop. Sacramento chapter owes us from that thing last year. San Francisco will come, they always do. Vallejo and Stockton are solid. Modesto, if we mention Teresa's involved. Conservatively, Miles looked up with a sharp smile. 300 bikes, maybe more if word spreads. Ronan looked around the room at men who'd become his family through choice and loyalty, at women who rode beside them as equals, at the community they'd built through blood and sweat and shared purpose. Tomorrow morning, Margaret picks up Sophie at 10 a.m. Sarah supervises. They're going to Anna's house to get Sophie's belongings. Travis will be at work. We've already arranged for his supervisor to call him in for a mandatory inventory shift. But while Sophie's collecting her things, something else is going to happen. Something that makes sure Travis Holbrook understands he's lost, that he'll never touch her again, that there are consequences for hurting children even when the law moves too slow. He looked toward the back room where Sophie was pretending to sleep. This is for her, and for every kid who needs protection but doesn't have anyone willing to fight for them. We're going to show Oakland what real protection looks like. Outside phone calls began. Text messages flew across cellular networks. Bikers from 5 chapters received notifications that Hells Angels Oakland was calling in every favor, every debt, every bond of brotherhood. By nightfall, over 200 motorcycles were being prepared for the ride to Oakland. By midnight, the parking lot was filling with incoming riders who traveled from Sacramento and San Francisco and Stockton and beyond. The message was being prepared, refined, made ready for delivery. And Travis Holbrook, drunk in his house on 98th Avenue and confident that his brother-in-law would protect him from consequences, had absolutely no idea that his world was about to be shattered by 300 engines roaring in unified purpose. Sophie lay in her bed, listening to the rumble of arriving motorcycles, feeling the building energy, knowing something massive was coming without fully understanding its shape. Tomorrow she would leave this clubhouse that had been her sanctuary. Tomorrow she would face her mother for the first time since running away. Tomorrow the Hells Angels would send their message, and nothing would ever be the same again. Margaret Patterson arrived at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning, her Honda Accord practical and reliable, in ways that felt reassuring after days of motorcycles and leather. She emerged from the car with determination written across every line of her body, moving with the purposeful energy of someone who'd made decisions in the night and wouldn't be swayed by doubt or fear. She was 64, but carried herself like someone who'd weathered storms and learned how to stand when winds tried to knock her down. Sophie ran to her before Margaret had fully cleared the car door, throwing herself into arms that closed around her with fierce protectiveness. The hug smelled like lavender soap and fresh-baked bread, scents that triggered memories of better times when her father was alive. And Thanksgivings meant safety rather than shouting matches. "You're coming home with me," Margaret whispered into Sophie's tangled hair, her voice thick with emotion and absolute conviction. "You're going to be safe now. I promise you that, baby girl." Sarah arrived moments later in her sleek SUV, all business, despite the early hour. They caravanned across Oakland toward the house on 98th Avenue with Catherine Mitchell, the exhausted CPS caseworker, following in her beat-up Honda Civic. The drive took 20 minutes through morning traffic past familiar landmarks that Sophie had walked 4 days ago when the world had been different and she'd been more desperate. The house looked smaller than Sophie remembered, shabbier in daylight without the filter of calling it home. Peeling paint on the siding weeds overtaking the small yard, a general air of neglect that matched her mother's retreat from caring about anything beyond her next glass of wine. Catherine was already waiting outside when they arrived, clipboard in hand, an expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. Anna Brennan answered the door on the second knock. Sophie's breath caught, seeing her mother transformed by 3 months into someone almost unrecognizable. Anna had always been thin, but now she looked skeletal, her collarbones jutting sharply beneath a stained t-shirt. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, making her look decades older than 36. Her hair hung limp and unwashed, and her hands trembled with the particular shake that came from withdrawal or hangover or both. When Anna saw Sophie standing on the cracked walkway, something cracked in her expression. Guilt and relief and desperate love all tangled together in ways that were too complicated to separate. "Baby, I've been so worried. Where have you been?" "The police said," Margaret's voice cut through with steel wrapped in velvet. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare call her baby after what you let happen to her. Don't you dare pretend you were worried when you sat on your couch and watched that man hurt your daughter day after day and did nothing to stop it." Anna flinched as if physically struck, her already pale face going whiter. "I didn't know it was so bad. Travis said he was just establishing boundaries, that I was too soft on her after Daniel died. He said children needed structure and discipline, and I believed him because I didn't know what else to do." "Bruises don't lie, Anna." Sarah stepped forward, her attorney voice cold and clinical. "Neither do medical reports documenting multiple injuries over months. Neither do photographs that will be presented to a judge. You failed your daughter in the most fundamental way a mother can fail. Now you're going to stand aside and let her collect her belongings in peace." The next hour was surreal in ways that made Sophie feel like she was floating outside her own body, watching from a distance. She moved through her old bedroom like a ghost visiting its former life, packing clothes, that mostly didn't fit anymore, in books she'd read before the world changed. Her mother hovered in the doorway crying, trying to apologize in broken sentences that Sophie couldn't respond to because she had no words for the complicated tangle of emotions, love and anger, and grief and betrayal all knotted together too tightly to separate. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I love you. I never stopped loving you even when I couldn't protect you." Sophie kept packing folding shirts with mechanical precision. Love without protection was just words, and words didn't stop fists or make bruises heal faster. She found Daniel's work boot in the back of her closet where she'd hidden it, the leather still holding that faint smell of a motor oil and cinnamon gum that meant safety in a language older than words. She held it for a long moment, remembering the day she'd found the note, the spark of hope that had carried her through 2 miles of Oakland streets to find unlikely saviors. "I'm taking this," she said, looking at her mother directly for the first time. Anna nodded, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Your father would be so proud of your courage, Sophie. I'm just sorry I made you need to be that brave. I'm sorry for all of it." Sophie carried the boot to Margaret's car. As they loaded the last box into the trunk, a sound reached them from the distance. Faint at first, but growing steadily louder, building like thunder on a clear day. A rumble that shook the air and rattled windows in their frames. The unmistakable roar of dozens, then hundreds of motorcycles. Catherine looked up from her clipboard, confusion crossing her exhausted features. "What the hell is that?" They came from all directions at once, converging on 98th Avenue like a mechanical storm that blotted out every other sound. Harleys and choppers and custom bikes, their engines creating a symphony of power that vibrated through Sophie's chest and made the ground tremble beneath her feet. They lined both sides of the narrow residential street, parking with military precision, their riders dismounting in coordinated waves that spoke to planning and purpose. Sophie stood frozen, watching the impossible sight unfold before her eyes. There had to be 300 bikers, maybe more. She lost count trying to track them all. They wore leather vests with patches from a dozen different chapters. Oakland and San Francisco, Sacramento, and Stockton, and Vallejo, and Modesto. But they all shared the same colors, the same death head emblem that marked them as brothers and sisters in an organization most people cross streets to avoid. Neighbors began emerging from houses drawn by the thunderous noise. They stood on porches and lawns, filming on phones, recording something they'd talk about for years, something that would become neighborhood legend passed down through generations. Ronan emerged from the formation leading a core group that included Miles and Dante and Beckett and the bald man with the scar through his eyebrow. They walked with deliberate purpose toward the house where Anna stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale with terror, as she realized this display was for her, about her because of her failures. "Anna Brennan," Ronan's voice carried across the sudden silence with authority that commanded attention from everyone within earshot. "We're not here for you, but you need to understand something, and you need to understand it completely. Your daughter is under our protection now. She always will be. Anyone, and I mean anyone who threatens her, who tries to hurt her again, who even thinks about touching her, will answer to every single person you see standing on this street today." He gestured to the sea of bikers lining 98th Avenue, 300 pairs of eyes focused on the small house with laser intensity. The visual impact was overwhelming, a show of force that transcended threat and became promise, became covenant, became the kind of protection that no system could match. "We knew Daniel Brennan," Ronan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. "He was a good man and a good father. He trusted us to protect his daughter if she ever needed protection. Well, she needed it. She walked 2 miles through Oakland alone because she had nowhere else to turn, and we answered that call. Now we're sending a message not just to you, but to everyone in this neighborhood, in this city, in this world. Sophie is family, and we protect family with everything we have." He turned his attention to the house itself, his expression hardening. "Where is Travis Holbrook right now?" Anna's voice shook so badly the words were almost unintelligible. "At work. He doesn't know you're here. He doesn't know anything." "Oh, he will." Ronan's smile was sharp and dangerous. "His co-workers are sending him videos right this moment. And when he gets home tonight, he's going to find something waiting for him that makes clear just how completely he's lost." Miles stepped forward, carrying a large manila envelope bulging with documents. He handed it to Catherine Mitchell, who took it with hands that trembled slightly. That's a complete dossier on Travis Holbrook. Every incident we've documented over the past week. Every time he came home drunk and violent. Every display of instability and danger. All of it time-stamped, photographed, legally obtained. Your office should have it. Your supervisors should see it. Because we've done in 1 week what the system should have been doing for months. Catherine opened the envelope with shaking fingers, quickly scanning contents that made her eyes widen progressively. This is, Lucy, this is incredibly thorough. You have surveillance footage, witness statements corroborating evidence. This is better documentation than most official investigations produce. We take care of our own, Miles said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. The sound of sirens approached, growing louder until 3 Oakland Police Department units arrived with lights flashing. Detective James Morrison emerged from the lead car, badge visible on his belt, hand resting casually on his service weapon in a gesture meant to intimidate. His face was red with anger, barely contained beneath professional veneer. This is an illegal assembly blocking a public street. You're interfering with a residential neighborhood. Disperse immediately, or I'll arrest every single one of you for disturbing the peace and obstruction. Ronan didn't move, didn't flinch, his voice absolutely level. We're exercising our First Amendment right to peaceful assembly, Detective. No laws being broken, no violence occurring, no threats being made, just citizens standing on a public street. Unless you'd like to explain why that's suddenly illegal. Morrison's face went from red to purple. You're interfering with an ongoing police investigation into potential kidnapping and custodial interference. Sarah stepped forward, her attorney presence cutting through Morrison's bluster like a knife. What investigation would that be? Detective, the one you initiated to obstruct Child Protective Services proceedings, the one where you flagged Sophie Brennan's case to delay her grandmother's emergency custody petition, the one you're running to protect your brother-in-law, Travis Holbrook, from facing consequences for child abuse. Morrison's expression shifted from anger to panic in the space between heartbeats. I don't know what you're talking about. Those are serious allegations without any evidence. Sarah pulled out her phone, holding it up so the gathering media cameras' news vans had arrived, drawn by the spectacle of 300 bikers could see the screen. We have phone records showing multiple calls between you and Travis Holbrook since Sophie came forward. We have text messages where you offered to make CPS files disappear if Travis moved quickly. We have documentation that you used police databases to track Hells Angels' Oakland activities and fed that information to your brother-in-law. You want to talk about illegal? Let's discuss corruption and obstruction of justice. The words landed like bombs in the sudden silence. Morrison opened his mouth, closed. It opened it again without any sound emerging. The cameras were recording everything, broadcasting live to local news channels. His corruption was being exposed in real time to thousands of viewers, his career imploding under scrutiny he'd never expected. Those records are illegally obtained. He started weakly. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged with a cold smile, but they exist, and every media outlet in Oakland is about to receive copies, along with testimony from Teresa Holbrook, Travis's ex-wife, about how you helped suppress her restraining order case in 2019. You helped him then, and you're helping him now. That's not family loyalty, Detective. That's criminal conspiracy. Margaret Patterson stepped forward, her grandmother voice finding strength she'd kept buried for months. She looked directly at the news cameras, understanding instinctively that this moment was bigger than just her family. I tried to warn my daughter about Travis Holbrook 6 months ago at Thanksgiving. She wouldn't listen. She chose him over her mother's concerns, over common sense, over her daughter's safety. But I'm listening now. I'm paying attention now. I'm petitioning for emergency custody of my granddaughter Sophie, and I will not let bureaucracy or corruption delay that process one more day. This child has suffered enough. She turned to face the cameras fully, her voice growing stronger. Oakland should be ashamed. This city should be embarrassed that bikers had to do what police and child services couldn't or wouldn't do, protect a vulnerable child. If the system actually worked, Sophie would never have needed to walk 2 miles alone to find strangers for help. But she did walk those 2 miles. And these men and women answered her call when everyone else failed her. That says something profound about who the real criminals are and who the real heroes are. The statement hung in the air, captured by a dozen cameras already being shared on social media platforms, where it would rack up millions of views over the next week. Margaret Patterson, respectable grandmother from Sacramento, calling out systemic failure and praising Hells Angels Oakland for succeeding where institutions had catastrophically failed. Ronan raised his voice, addressing the assembled bikers with military command. Brothers and sisters, we came here to send a message. I think it's been received loud and clear. Now let's make absolutely sure it echoes. Make sure every person on this street, in this neighborhood, in this city understands what we're saying. On some silent signal that Sophie couldn't detect, 300 bikers mounted their motorcycles simultaneously. The coordinated movement was beautiful in its precision, frightening in its implications. They settled onto their bikes as one organism, as single entity united in purpose. The sound when 300 engines roared to life at exactly the same moment was apocalyptic. Sophie felt it in her bones, in her teeth, in her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs. The mechanical thunder shook, foundations rattled, windows in their frames set off car alarms in a cascading wave that spread down the block. It was power made audible, strength transformed into sound protection, given voice. They revved their engines once. The noise was overwhelming, drowning out thought and conversation and every other sensation. Twice. The sound built on itself, layering harmonics that vibrated through air, force, and ground and flesh. 3 times, the final crescendo was almost painful in its intensity, a statement that couldn't be misunderstood or ignored, a message delivered with such force that it would resonate for years in the memories of everyone who witnessed it. Then, as coordinated as they had arrived, they departed. They rolled out in formation, a river of chrome and leather flowing down 98th Avenue, like water following gravity. The procession took 10 minutes to clear, completely, 300 motorcycles passing in review, while neighbors stood transfixed and cameras captured everything for posterity. As the last bike disappeared around the corner, the street fell into stunned silence, broken only by distant sirens and the fading rumble of engines. Neighbors remained on their lawns, talking excitedly, showing each other phone footage, processing what they just witnessed. Within an hour, the videos would be viral. Within a day, national news outlets would pick up the story. Within a week, Hells Angels Protect Abused Child would become the kind of narrative that changed how people thought about motorcycle clubs and institutional failure, and who really kept vulnerable people safe. Sophie stood beside Margaret's car, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over her like a blanket. The Hells Angels had just made her the most protected 8-year-old in Oakland, had publicly claimed her as family in a way that no one could dismiss or ignore. Travis Holbrook would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing that 300 people had sworn to protect her from him. Catherine approached Sophie with new respect, visible in her exhausted eyes. "Sophie, I'm expediting your case. Top priority. That demonstration it was a lot of things, but it was effective. I'm recommending immediate placement with your grandmother pending emergency hearing, which I'm going to personally ensure happens this week, not 2 weeks from now. You've got people fighting for you in ways I've rarely seen." Margaret wrapped an arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Can we go now? Can I take her home?" "Yes," Catherine's voice was firm. "Take her to Sacramento. Keep her safe. I'll file the paperwork this afternoon." As they drove away from 98th Avenue, Sophie turned to watch through the rear window. Neighbors still stood in the street, pointing and talking, the energy of what had happened lingering like electricity after lightning. Anna stood in the doorway, looking lost and broken, finally understanding the magnitude of her failure. Morrison sat in his police car on the phone, his career unraveling in real time as Internal Affairs began their investigation. The message had been sent. Everyone had received it, and nothing would ever be the same. Travis Holbrook's life imploded within hours. Videos of the demonstration reached his warehouse workplace by noon. His co-workers watched 300 bikers descend on his street and shared the footage with management. His supervisor called him into the office at 2 o'clock with security present. "Travis, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. Can't have someone associated with child abuse working here. It's a liability issue. Security will escort you out." Travis tried to protest, to explain, to convince them the videos were taken out of context. "Those bikers are lying. The kid's mother is crazy. This is all a misunderstanding." 300 bikers didn't show up for a misunderstanding, his supervisor said flatly. "Get out, now." By evening, Anna had changed the locks and piled Travis's belongings on the front porch in garbage bags. When he arrived home to find his key didn't work and his possessions bagged like trash, he pounded on the door screaming threats until a patrol car arrived, not Morrison this time, but officers who'd seen the viral videos and had no interest in protecting an abuser. "Mr. Holbrook, you need to leave. You're trespassing on private property. This is my house, that's my stuff. Actually, the lease is in Anna Brennan's name. She's asked you to leave. Take your belongings and go, or we'll arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Travis loaded his bags into his truck with shaking hands, rage and fear warring on his face. He drove away from 98th Avenue that night and never returned to Oakland. Later investigation would place him in Texas using a different name, working under the table at construction sites, looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. Detective Morrison fared only marginally better. Oakland PD Internal Affairs opened their investigation within 24 hours of Sarah's public accusations. His suspension came the next day. The evidence, phone records, text messages, database queries showing abuse of police resources was overwhelming. His badge was surrendered, his weapon collected, his career effectively ended, while criminal charges for corruption and obstruction of justice were prepared. The media coverage was relentless. Local news ran stories about systemic failure and unlikely heroes. National outlets picked up the narrative of bikers protecting children when police protected abusers. Editorial boards wrote scathing pieces about child protective services being so overwhelmed that private citizens had to fill the gaps. The Hells Angels Oakland chapter became unlikely symbols of justice, their president Ronan appearing on news programs to discuss child protection and institutional accountability. The emergency custody hearing happened 3 days later instead of 2 weeks. Judge Patricia Harmon presided her courtroom packed with media advocates and several Hells Angels sitting quietly in the gallery, wearing their colors with dignity. Margaret testified about her willingness and eagerness to provide a stable home. Sophie testified via closed-circuit television about the abuse, her voice steady despite the difficulty of reliving trauma. Teresa Holbrook drove from Modesto to testify about Travis's pattern of escalating violence, her courage visibly shaking but unwavering. Catherine Mitchell testified about CPS recommendations. Dr. Rodriguez presented medical evidence documenting months of systematic abuse. Sarah Chen synthesized it all into a closing argument that made the courtroom go silent. "Your Honor, this case represents everything broken about how we protect children. Sophie Brennan had to walk 2 miles alone to find safety because every adult system failed her. Her mother failed her. Child Protective Services was too overwhelmed to respond quickly. Law enforcement actively obstructed justice. But a motorcycle club and organization society views with suspicion and fear stepped up when no one else would. They documented evidence, provided protection, and mobilized resources that forced the system to finally pay attention. The question before this court isn't whether Sophie deserves protection. It's whether we'll finally provide it through proper channels or whether we'll force vulnerable children to keep seeking help from whoever will actually give it. Judge Harmon's ruling came after 15 minutes of deliberation. In 30 years on the family court bench, I've never seen a case quite like this one. The system failed Sophie Brennan catastrophically. Her mother failed her through enabling and neglect. Law enforcement failed her through corruption. But a group of citizens, motorcycle club members, for heaven's sake, succeeded where all our institutions failed. She looked directly at Ronan sitting in the gallery. Mr. Cross, the Hells Angels Oakland chapter, acted with more care for this child's welfare than many I've seen from licensed social workers and mandated reporters. While I cannot officially condone your methods, I acknowledge the results. Sophie is alive, safe, and has family willing to protect her. That matters more than procedural propriety. Her gavel came down with finality. Full custody granted to Margaret Patterson effective immediately. Travis Holbrook's contact with the minor child is permanently prohibited. A restraining order will be issued. Anna Brennan is granted supervised visitation contingent upon completion of a comprehensive rehabilitation program, including therapy, parenting classes, and substance abuse treatment lasting minimum 1 year. Court is adjourned. Sophie left the courthouse holding Margaret's hand, her other hand clutching a small stuffed elephant that Diane had given her that morning. She was going home to Sacramento to a house with yard in her own room and a grandmother who'd fought for her, she was safe. Legally, officially, permanently safe. 6 months later, Oakland hosted a children's safety summit organized jointly by Hells Angels Oakland and local child advocacy organizations. The event drew hundreds of attendees, social workers, teachers, parents, advocates, and several dozen bikers providing security and logistics. Sophie stood backstage at the community center, 9 years old now, and looking healthier than she had in a year. Her bruises had faded completely. She'd gained weight, her face filling out to look like childhood instead of starvation. She wore a purple dress that Margaret had helped her pick out, and her hair was brushed and neat. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," Margaret whispered, squeezing her hand. "No one will judge you if you change your mind." But Sophie had practiced her speech with Dr. Rodriguez. Her therapist had worked through the fear and decided that telling her story might help someone else, that giving voice to her experience could protect other children trapped the way she'd been trapped. She walked onto the stage with her note cards clutched tight, looking out at hundreds of faces. She found Ronan in the back row, Diane beside him, Miles and Dante and Beckett spread throughout the crowd providing silent support. Her voice started uncertain, but grew stronger with each word. "My name is Sophie Brennan. I'm 9 years old. A year ago, someone who lived in my house hurt me. He hit me and pushed me and made me feel like I was worthless. My mom didn't stop him. She just watched and pretended everything was fine." The room was absolutely silent, every person focused completely on this small girl speaking difficult truths. "I was scared and alone, but I found something my dad had left for me, a note telling me where to go if I needed help. So I walked 2 miles through Oakland by myself to find the Hells Angels. Everyone says that was brave, but I was just desperate. The brave people were the ones who believed me without making me prove anything first. The brave people were the bikers who protected me when the system moved too slow." She looked directly at Ronan. "I learned that family isn't always blood. Family is who chooses to protect you even when they don't have to. Family is who listens when you speak, even when listening is hard. Family is who stands between you and danger, even when it's risky for one of them." Her voice dropped, becoming more intimate. "If something bad is happening to you, tell someone. Keep telling people until someone listens and helps. Because there are people who will believe you. They might just not look like what you expect. They might have tattoos and motorcycles and leather jackets. They might look scary, but sometimes the scariest looking people are actually the safest ones." Standing ovation erupted, thunderous applause that lasted minutes. People were crying, including several of the hard-looking bikers in the back. Sophie saw Ronan wipe his eyes, saw Diane openly weeping, saw grown men who'd survived violence and loss, finding catharsis in this child's courage. Afterwards, Sophie was surrounded by people wanting to meet her, to thank her, to tell her she was inspiring. But she made her way through the crowd to Ronan, who crouched down to her level the way he had that first day. "You did good, kid, really good. Your dad would be so proud. I couldn't have done any of it without you, without all of you. You walked those 2 miles yourself. You made the hard choice to ask for help. That courage was all you. We just answered the call." 3 years passed. Sophie turned 12, thriving in Sacramento with Margaret. She was a straight-A student president of the art club, played soccer with enthusiasm if not exceptional skill. The nightmares had diminished to occasional occurrences rather than nightly terrors. She saw Dr. Rodriguez monthly instead of weekly, a sign of healing rather than ongoing crisis. Anna had completed her rehabilitation program, 18 months of therapy and parenting classes, and facing the reality of her failures. She visited Sophie once a month under supervision, their relationship slowly rebuilding into something functional, if not what it had been. They would never have the easy closeness of before Daniel died, but they were finding their way towards something honest. Travis remained in Texas, working under an assumed name, looking over his shoulder. His violence had finally caught up with consequences that lasted. Sophie's 12th birthday party filled Margaret's Sacramento backyard with laughter and life. Friends from school ran around playing games. Margaret's church community provided food and supervision, and 20 Hells Angels, who'd made the trip from Oakland, stood along the fence like protective sentinels who'd somehow become honored guests. Ronan approached Sophie carrying a heavy cardboard box, his expression serious but warm. "Got something for you, kid. Something I've been holding on to." Inside the box, carefully wrapped, were tools, wrenches, and screwdrivers and socket sets, all well used but meticulously maintained. They smelled faintly of oil and care of someone who'd love them and use them well. These were your dad's to— "Oh, I'm better but dads," Ronan explained quietly. "He kept them at the clubhouse, used them to help us with repairs. I thought you should have them. Maybe someday you'll want to learn mechanics, carry on that tradition. Or maybe you'll do something completely different. Either way, they're yours now." Part of his legacy. Sophie touched the tools reverently, feeling connection to her father through cold metal and worn handles. "Thank you. This means everything. Thank you for being brave enough to walk into our clubhouse that day. Thank you for trusting us. You gave me purpose when I had lost it, gave me a chance to do right by a child after I failed my own daughter. You're part of our family now, Sophie. That doesn't change just because you moved to Sacramento." Margaret watched her granddaughter surrounded by loved school friends and church family and intimidating bikers who'd become unlikely guardian angels. Sophie had transformed from terrified abuse victim into confident, compassionate young woman who understood that heroism comes in unexpected forms and family is built through choice and loyalty rather than just blood. As the sun set over Sacramento, motorcycles lined the quiet residential street, creating their familiar rumble. Neighbors no longer called the police. They'd learned these scary bikers were protectors, that leather and tattoos didn't define character or intention. Sophie stood on the lawn holding Daniel's tools, wearing the jacket Diane had made her years ago, with its embroidered guardian angel and single word protected. She was surrounded by the family she'd been born into, and the family she'd chosen, and the family who'd chosen her back. The girl who'd walked 2 miles through Oakland, fear had found not just rescue but belonging. The bikers who'd answered her desperate call had found not just redemption but purpose. And the world had learned that sometimes the most dangerous-looking people become the most powerful protectors, that family isn't blood, but choice, that courage is walking toward help even when help looks nothing like what you expect. Sophie Brennan was safe, was loved, was healing, and she would spend the rest of her life paying that protection forward, becoming an advocate for vulnerable children, a voice for those who couldn't speak, a living reminder that system failures could be overcome by people who chose to care more than they feared. The guardian angels wore leather and rode motorcycles with engines that roared like thunder, and they were still watching over her. They always would be, because family protects family. Always.